So for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, welcome to the MOTU webinar series. It's been going on now for a week or so, a couple of weeks. My name is Matt LaPoint from MOTU, and Jim Cooper from MOTU is also joining me as my wingman co-host. And so today, let's dive into some other topics in DP. So far we've covered things like pitch correction. We've got into using, some of the new features like the memory strip for doing overdubs. Today we're going to get into the comp tool. Tomorrow is all about ZTX and our new beat detection 2.0 engine. So the ability to be able to change the tempo of audio sessions very fluidly and sonically and with excellent detail. And then also being able to quantize audio, individual parts, or even drum sets. I have a couple of different demonstrations of quantizing a drum set and being able to pick elements of the kit to quantize and then maintaining phase across the kit. So that's tomorrow's ZTX. And I think the way the schedule, we're going to release the schedule email soon. And I think the email will have us doing clips. So I'd love for you to catch the clips demo, because I think a lot of people may have a certain idea of what clips is. If they're, let's say you're a certain composer or you work on a certain type of music, you might think, well, clips looks like electronic music. It's really not my thing. And I'd love for you to see how you can use clips in more elaborate ways, creative ways, for compositions, for organizing files, for playback. It's very interactive. It's a really an amazing addition to DP. I mean, DP was already such a deep tool, and now with chunks and everything that it does, ZTX, pitch correction, now we've got this new element called clips. So cool. I'm going to go over here to screen share, and let's go into, here we are in DP 10.11. This is a laptop running 10.14.6. DP will run on Catalina, and it works pretty well. We're still, ongoing testing is happening here, and a lot of you are now buying the new machines that obviously pre-ship with Catalina. And the idea is to make sure that all of your audio plugins, all of your drivers, all the extensions that you use on your computer are up to date. Obviously, make sure that everything is compatible and is as current as possible to maintain the best stability with Catalina. But what's happening, that's working well. So I've got an empty project here. Today we're going to talk about comp tool. And what is the comp tool? The comp tool is a way to create a composite of multiple takes. So I want to talk about a couple of different ways that we record audio in DP as musicians, producers, engineers. And first and foremost, let's just simply add a mono audio track. Now I've got a mono audio track. We're going to option click and call this Vox. Okay, obviously we can change the color. And now you can see we've got an input and output. The input says U87, but you can see this is a 414. A lot of your interfaces will let you name the I/O on the hardware level, but DP also has a bundles window where you can actually custom name your audio inputs, your buses, your audio outputs. Makes it very easy when you're trying to grab inputs or send things to various reverbs to have those buses labeled. So Shift U is the shortcut, or Studio Bundles. And now look under inputs, there's my quote U87. We're going to option click, and I'll just call this 414. This shows right here in this window, I've got a 1248. That's one of MOTU's Thunderbolt USB interfaces. That's networkable through AVB. It's a great interface. The 1248, you can see I've got things like the V drum coming in. I've got other types of inputs going in, digital, analog inputs and outputs happening, but this is the input side. So now if I added more inputs here, and let's say in your studio, you've got an interface with 8 channels or 16 channels, 24 channel inputs, because you're using a console, or maybe you're doing sort of a mixerless thing with mic pre's. And so you can, once you're in this field with option, you could just, if everything was hardwired, you can rename all your I/O. And that way, when you go to your inputs for audio tracks, you'll see a list of your, not only the inputs, the physical inputs, but the custom names that you've given them. So we're not going to worry about those extras. Right now, I'm just got one input into DP, which is just the 414. Output, I'm going out. I've renamed the output. Sometimes I don't like having long names. And if your interface, let's say, has a very long name, and it's taking up column space in your DP project, and you'd say, I don't really need to be that long, it's perfectly fine to come into outputs and rename it. Something as small as mix out, mix left and right, 1 and 2, whatever makes sense for you. And sometimes you'll notice I've got an actual virtual pair of outputs called dry out. So if I'm mixing in Digital Performer with a master fader with effects, and I'm comparing my mix to a composer mix or a reference mix from an artist, I can send the output of the artist mix or composer mix to the dry output pair. So now I don't, because that's one thing about DP, depending on your outputs, sometimes if you're listening to something you brought into the project, chances are it's probably going through the master fader. So you're hearing the master fader effects on something that you really don't want to. You want to hear the raw dry. So I've set up a virtual bus where I can set my output for temp music to a dry output pair. But generally, most of us are in the box. We're mixing out in stereo. Some of us will work on consoles and do summing. And don't forget that we can also switch here to various outputs, multi-channel outputs like quad, 5.1, 7.1 outputs, and that's where we do that. And you can obviously add more pairs. The other thing I want to mention about the bundles, we've kind of gone over this, but just as a reminder, you can always save your bundles. You can import or export bundles. If you've done all this naming and you want to be able to bring those custom names into another project, you can just simply come up here and just say, well, we're going to export these to the desktop, Command D, and just be ML bundles, save. And then, of course, I can import those bundles. So we've got just a mono audio track, and we've gone over this before in the last couple of webinars, where if I set up a loop point, let's say bar 1 to, let's just set the input start to bar 1, and we're going to stop at bar 3. And now if we turn on loop record, we've got the new memory strip, which is really handy. And that's one of the first things we went over with the first webinar series was these new shortcuts, excuse me, we've added in DP10, where we're able to set where we're starting and looping and auto recording. And this makes it really fast and easy. You don't have to come over here and punch in numbers. You can say, well, we're going to stop at bar 15 and we're going to start at bar 9. And you'll notice if I hold the command key, I can toggle the grid. So if I want to slip a little bit ahead and say, well, somewhere before the bar 8, you can slip and change that. But what we're going to do is let's move this back to bar 1. And we're going to loop to bar 3, and I'm going to put that track in record. We're going to turn on overdub. Now, these icons look a little bit different. In DP, you have all these custom themes, and every theme has sort of a different look. I tend to like darker themes for my eyes, working late, and I like to kind of keep it more dark, but we have lighter themes. We have all sorts of interesting themes, and that's obviously under Preferences. We'll take off a clicks here, click, and we go up, and we're able to go to Themes, and we can audition lots of different types of themes, bright themes and dark themes and so on. And some people will actually get in, and I've at one point gone into some of the files, the resource files, and be able to change some of my own custom fonts and custom layouts. And you can do that kind of at your own sort of risk, but usually it's fine. You can do some creative things with the XML files. So we're back to the default skin or theme. And so now we're just going to loop this bar, these couple bars, and with overdub, watch what happens with the take. So I'm going to hit record. And we're going to go to take 2, take 3, and so on. So one liberating thing about this behavior is, you set up a 5-bar, 8-bar loop, you're a saxophone player, and you're playing parts, and it's just automatically going to the next take, and you don't have to think about it. You're not having to worry about DP. Let it do its thing. You worry about your performance. You lay down your parts. And then when you finish, you want to save. And you go back, and now you're going to look at these different takes and decide, well, and that's what we're going to get into today is how do I choose the best performances. But I want, at least for now, talk about the mechanics of setting up the recording and what's the best way to do this. So obviously we can switch between the various takes that I did, and that's no problem at all. And so I wanted you guys to be aware of that. Someone suggested here in the webinar series to do this behavior for MIDI, which I thought was a great idea. And so Jim and I were going to ask the developers about the possibility of letting you, because currently the behavior is when you're overdubbing, it's going to add a layer of parts with MIDI data. And so maybe that's something we'll do for MIDI. But for audio, remember, when you're looping, it's going to go to the next take. It's going to increment the take to the next take. And that's a cool behavior. So definitely utilize that. But I also wanted to, let me undo. I'm always like to show you as we go through this, using the undo history as a means of me going back to earlier states of the project. And so we all know, that under edit, we can always undo, redo, and it shows us what our move was. I want to keep redoing, but sometimes for me, visually, I'll go up to edit, and I'll go to the undo history, and now I can see everything I've done dating back to when we started today here at whatever, 9:30. So we can go back in time. So let's see, where does it say here? Open the project. So we're going to go back to delete. Okay, that's a good place to be right there. Okay, so we've got our track. So here's another way. I was just thinking about a vocal session that I did with a professional singer, and it was a kind of a well-known producer, and it was very kind of a semi-stressful situation because this situation where I was going to, loop and do a bunch of different takes on a track was not going to fly. And this is where a lot of us work this way. So here's the scenario. So let me go up here and let's delete that track. When I go to Project and we go to Add Track, if I hold the Option key, I'm able to add multiple. You'll see if I let go of the Option key, I can add single tracks like MIDI tracks, mono tracks, stereo tracks. Hold the Option key, now I can have multiple. So let's do multiple mono. And when I choose that, it says, well, how many would you like? Let's do 12. Okay, now remember, when you're in the Tracks window in DP, the default setting for vertical zoom is Command arrow keys. So if you want to be able to show more tracks in the window, or you want to really get to see them better and kind of make them larger so you can see the fonts, and remember, you can use Command up and down arrow keys as a way to zoom vertically, see those tracks better. Cool. So now look, all the inputs, because my input in the bundles, Shift U, was set to 414, and my outputs were set to left and right, when I added all those tracks, they're already assigned correctly. And that's very useful. Sometimes you might, every time you choose an input, let's say you go over here to a different bus, it starts populating the bundles with all these various channels. So I'm just kind of going quickly here because I want you to see that as you're working on a project and you choose lots of hardware inputs or bus inputs, they'll start collecting in this list. And that's useful sometimes to be able to go, oh, I want to choose this input or that input. But just remember, you can do that from the input column, or you can also go to the bundles window, Shift U. And now look, when we've gone into inputs, there's the 414, but now I've got various things like buses that are starting to show up in the input column. So I'm a big fan of when you're creating buses in DP. And remember, buses are like digital pathways, sending a signal from one place to another inside the program. And so it's nice to name those buses, especially when you're going to be reverbs or delays or some kind of an effect that you want to use. Or let's say you're going to use a bus as a way to take a bunch of drum tracks and send them all to a common auxiliary track. And so it's nice to be able to create a stereo bus and say, well, that's a drum. That's my drum bus. Cool. And then so now I've got a percussion, I've got plates, guitars, verbs. And so it's nice to manage that. And you can see you can have, 128 different stereo buses. So you can get very elaborate with where you're sending audio within DP. And again, inside the box. And at some point, it's going to have to come out through a hardware pair to get out to, your converters, whether it's even just the built-in computer or through an audio interface. Cool. So let's continue going through here. So now this is a situation where we've got this vocal, it's a fairly stressful vocal session going on here, and we're not going to know what the producer's going to want to do. So let's just name these tracks here real quick. Or let's just say, we'll name a few of these here. I'm just going to blast down the list, just calling these vocals like V1, V2, V3, V4, and so on and so forth. And we talked about using our temporary tools for changing the track colors. So let's do that. I'm going to take the first half, I'm going to highlight these, and I've highlighted the names. I'm going to hold the letter T as in Tom, and I'm going to switch. These guys are all going to be sort of a light blue, and I'm going to think of those as sort of lead vocal tracks. I'm going to highlight the last 6. I'm going to hold T. These are going to be a little bit darker, kind of a royal blue. Now I'm going to put these in a folder because I'd like to be able to manage how I put them with the other instruments that are going to happen later on in the session. So I'm going to highlight all the names of the tracks, and Shift Command R will let me create a folder. And I'll just name these vocals, or that's fine, vocals. So we could obviously change the color of the parent folder. And so it could be whatever, a dark blue. We can close the folder, we can open the folder. Now remember, we can have nested folders. So if for whatever reason we get into a lot of background vocal tracks, and I just keep adding them. So maybe what I'll do at this point is just say, well, let's duplicate that track, and so on and so forth. I can just keep duplicating the tracks, or maybe I take all these tracks and we say, well, let's duplicate all those tracks. Now I've got a lot of these tracks and I need a nested folder now. So we're going to do that together. I'm going to highlight all these royal blue tracks, which are, again, those are going to be for background vocals. And now Shift Command R, I'm going to just say BGVs or something. Let's say BGVs for vocals. We'll close that. So now I've got all vocals inside there. I open it up, there's my lead vocals. I'll open up a subfolder, nested folder here of my background vocals. And at some point I decide, let's bring the background vocals out of that and let's just put it on its own level, grab it, take it up above. Now it's outside of the folder, so that the background vocals are here, the vocals are here. So, or if I want to drop it back in, I can open this folder. You'll notice if I drop it right below the folder, it gets put it as a nested folder. So you just have to put it right below the folder, like halfway, kind of between halfway and the bottom, let go, and it'll now enter into the other folder, the parent folder. So you can have many, many nested folders. And now one interesting thing you can do if you want to get rid of the folders, remember you can right click on the folder and say, we're going to delete both the folder and the tracks, or you can actually just remove the folder and keep the tracks. The other window that I like to use, so let's just kind of review that for a minute. When you open up the folder, if you right click on the folder itself, you're able to both remove the folder and keep the tracks, or delete the folder with the tracks. And there's another shortcut that I like to use, and in my room, it's actually Control-D. This is where you can manage deleting track folders. So let's go and actually look at that, where that lives in here. Track folders, delete track folders. Now, there's no default command for this, so I know I'm always reviewing this, kind of hammering over this, but the commands window in DP under Setup, Commands is where you can navigate all your shortcuts. And again, I'm happy to share whatever shortcuts I have. My rule of thumb is always use the default commands whenever possible, and then there's hundreds of commands that are unassigned. And as a quick side note, I know I'm always going on tangents here. For those of you who are really, really deeply into shortcuts, a program like Keyboard Maestro, not only will it give you the ability to add more commands, in other words, not commands where things aren't even commandable. Like let's say you find a menu item that there isn't even a place to, DP doesn't even allow you to set up a key command. Inside of Keyboard Maestro, you can set up commands based on pixels, locations of things inside menus. And not only can you do it for things that aren't assignable, you can actually set up macros, where one common macro that I know people will use is, let's say you go into the Soundbites window, Shift-B, there's all my Soundbites, and let's say I want a macro where I open up the Soundbites window and I select the unused Soundbites all in one move. Well, I could program that, and I could say, see how select unused Soundbites is not commandable, but it could be with a program like Keyboard Maestro. So I know I'm kind of going down a deep tunnel here, and I'll try to pull myself back here into the world of folders. That's where we were. So what I was doing was Control-D was my shortcut for deleting track folders. And so this is where I could come in here and say, well, I'm going to highlight all the folders and remove them all. We're back to square one. I've just got all my audio tracks, no folders whatsoever. Cool, but I'm going to leave it this way for now, and that's totally fine. Let's just show one thing we did in DP. For those of you who have been DP users for a long time, one of the coolest things when I first started running DP10 that I loved was I can just grab all these tracks and I can just reorder them so much more quickly and fluidly. By the way, not only can you reorder the tracks more fluidly, we actually made it so that it doesn't interrupt the audio when you move the tracks. And that's so great. You know, it's just working on this project, you're reordering the tracks, there's no hiccups, there's no problems with the audio playing back, it's very fluid. So that works really well. So here's what we're getting at here. After I keep talking about this, let's actually reassign this back to the 414. So let's say you're working with a vocalist, we're talking about the producer, and we're working on this whatever 3-bar phrase. And so we put this in record, and we're not going to worry about overdub. Well, we can leave overdub on. Let's just say I'm going to record my voice. By the way, I've got this in record. How do I check my level? Well, there's a couple ways. Remember, Shift-A is the audio monitor window. Shift-A will let us see, hey, there's my voice, check 1, 1, 1, 1. Pretty good level there. Kind of nice, not clipping, nice and hot. And that's perfect. So, but there's another great place to look at it as well, and that would be the meter bridge. So if we click on the meter bridge and we go to the input tab, there's me, long throw fader here. You can see check 1, 2, check 1, 2. And it's nice. It's a very good level, especially working at 24-bit resolution. We're going to get a nice lots of signal there without low noise floor and good not going to be clipping here. So that's a good place to check it. Meter bridge inputs, or Shift-A for the audio monitor window. Okay, so we're going to check that. I'm going to 1, 2 check. Testing 1, 2, 1, 2. The producer says, okay, let's get another take. Okay, mute that track, go down. 1, 2, testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. Okay, that's not very good. now he's producing the artist saying, I really want you to do this. I want you to say it this way. And so I'm engineering the session, and I know that I better keep those just in case. He hasn't really said throw those out yet. So I'm going to go to the next one. Okay, 2, 1, check 1, 2, check 1, 2. So now this is where things get kind of tricky. And the reason why we're working in what I call this is sort of the checkerboard sort of way of recording audio and vocals. Because if I was to do these as takes inside one track, first time the producer says, oh, well, let's hear one part of the first and this part of that, and let's harmonize this. Pretty soon, before you know it, you're like in a mode where how am I going to actually accomplish all those things? So you'll have to decide. Like what I'll do in the sequence editor is sometimes I'm parked and he's telling somebody, and I might just make some cuts where I know that there are breaks in the audio. And so what I might even do is not mute the tracks with the actual play icon, but I'll mute the various regions. Okay, I'm just holding M and clicking, and the mute tool is now muting these regions. I've left these tracks play enabled, so they'll play, and he says, well, let's hear the very first take, and then go into, after he gets to that second word he goes, go to the second take. So again, even if I use the comp tool, and now he says, well, let's harmonize the first part. So this is sort of, again, the checkerboard triage way of, you're doing a vocal session, or let's say you're doing, dialogue recording for a film, or you're doing a dialogue recording for a documentary, and you don't know where it's going to go in terms of doing layers and having people come in and add parts. So again, this is the mode where you just literally have a dozen tracks ready to go to be able to record and arm. And by the way, remember when you're in record in DP, you can use the arrow keys to just drop into the next track. And by the way, one cool thing we did in DP10, let me mute these tracks for a minute. Watch what happens if we record. And I just drop down the arrow as it goes. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2, testing, testing, testing. I'm just going checkerboarding back and forth. We couldn't do that in DP, earlier versions of DP. You couldn't do that. Now you can. You can switch it on the fly, and I'm just recording as I go right across all these different tracks. And that's pretty cool. No hiccups. I'm just recording, recording, recording. And look at what we did there. We stop. So a lot of people, again, might be using this sort of checkerboard style recording and we're not using the comp tool, and we're not advancing the take on one with overdub. We can't. There's too many situations where we're going to need to hear or mute or harmonize. So that's what I wanted you to be aware of. And there's even another way we're going to get into to think about organizing your session so that you're able to handle all the different things that are going to be thrown at you as an engineer or producer. So cool. That's our way of. Now, what's interesting about DP is if you have all these different tracks, and let's say, we want to organize this a little bit. A very cool feature. So check this out. If I highlight all of these tracks, remember they're all individual tracks. They all have the same input. They all have the same output. I'm going to save. Now they're all selected. And now I'm going to go to the take column of the very first vocal track. And when I click in here, I'm going to absorb all of those takes. Now they all disappear, but they're all right here in the take column. And so, by the way, if you really want these names to be more relevant, before I actually did that, undo, save, I would maybe come in here and tidy up these names a little bit. Well, that's, maybe that's the lead vocal, maybe that's the overdub, that's the harmony 1, harmony 2 part, that's the harmony double, however you want to name those so that when you actually do absorb all those different tracks into takes, they actually make sense. Because once they're in there, it's a little more challenging to actually rename those takes. But I'll show you a technique where once you're using the comp tool, you can change the names of the takes. So hopefully everybody's following me here. Well, we talked about when we first opened up DP, we had an audio track where I just looped it, and it just kept, with overdub, it just kept incrementing the take 1, take 2. Now there's a mode where we've got a dozen tracks, and we're able to just put it in record and use the arrow key to drop into record on different tracks. And again, maybe we would use the mute tool, and we're trying to just get through the session so that the producer's happy. And you never know when he's going to want to hear something. And so you can't really be in a mode where you're hidden takes. It has to be all on one level there. Cool. So let's talk about another way to do this. So we can kind of blow off my madness here. Let's save this, and we'll go all the way, and we'll highlight all these tracks. And I can right-click and say, delete. Bye-bye. They're gone. Okay, so let's talk about another interesting tool that that I'm actually proud to show. This is a cool addition to DP that goes back in the day. In fact, we're not even going to need an audio track for this. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to Shift P. Shift P is polar. Now this is a really cool tool that's been in DP for quite a while, quite a long time, but it's still really very relevant. And I think when I show you guys this, I want you guys to really think about how you could use this tool. When it first came on when we first added it to DP, the idea was that we could record in RAM because people had RAM on their computer and it wasn't recording to the drive. And so as you were looping and creating layers of audio, it was all being stored in RAM. And then at one point you could commit those takes into DP. And it's really cool. So here's the concept. You guys will learn it and we'll go slow here and I'll try to drink some coffee and make sure that we all understand how this works. So Shift P was polar. And the idea is, and you get the hang of it, it's a loop recorder inside DP. And we're going to set up our loop again. Let's actually go back up here to memory cycle. And we don't really need overdub in this case, so I'm going to turn off overdub. We're going to save. We'll do a 3 bars. That's fine. Odd number of bars. So at the very top of polar, we're going to use a mono input. There's my 414. Perfect. That's my mic. You're going to see as an input source, you're going to see your bundles. So it could be a bus, if you were coming in and you were bussing something through, but obviously, best to sometimes just choose a hardware input from your audio interface. So here it comes in. I'm going to create new passes by triggering the record gate. Now look down here. As I talk really quietly, I'm below the threshold. See, if I talk louder now, I'm above this little threshold. This little red indicator, that's where you set the threshold. So as you're talking or this vocalist is singing or you're setting up percussion mics and you're just watching that level. Again, it could be a mono input, could be a stereo input. So you've got the guy playing congas or you've got the piano player and you're going to use this tool to create some really cool layers. So you want to set this threshold according to the signal coming in. And again, I found it this morning. I was playing with this. And if I'm really quiet, I'm below the threshold. If I talk louder, I'm in the threshold. So what are we going to do with this now? We're not going to worry about solo and mute right now. But one thing we do want to look on the right here. Let's bring this over. I'm not going to worry about groups. Like you can really set up where you can have multiple groups. Let's not get into those little details. I mean, we definitely have remember a searchable PDF manual here. The Digital Performer User Guide is an extensive, 1,000 pages of tons of details on this amazing program. So what we're going to do is we're not going to mute. We can choose to mute the previous pass. So let's just do this and so you can see what's going to happen. I'm not going to mute the previous pass. When I actually set up this loop and it records, when it comes back around, it's not going to mute it. And what's cool is this is great because if you're playing a vocal part, you can harmonize the next pass. Or maybe you want to hear it or maybe you don't want to hear it. And so we're going to link the playback to the transport. That means just that when I'm playing and starting DP like I always do, whether with the buttons or with the numeric keypad on the computer, the polar is following right along. So here we go. I'm going to put it in record. Now I'm going to talk very quietly here, and you can see I'm not in record. But on the next pass, I'll record. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 check 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 check 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 check 1 2 1 2 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 check 1 2 1 2 2 1 2 1 2 check 1 2 check 1 2 1 2. So it's the world's most uninspired audio performance of all time, but that's okay because I want you guys to see what was happening here. When I first started recording and I hit the record button right here inside Polar, I was quieter than the threshold. So you'll notice that I was looping DP and yet nothing was recording because I'm below the threshold. I start saying the check 1, check 2, and you can see the very first thing that you saw was take 1, pass 1, is me going check, 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 so on and so forth. Then I was quiet, and I let the next time around, I started speaking. Once I got above the threshold, it started going into pass 2. So I just did 4 passes of this 3-bar loop, and I chose to hear the previous passes. So here's where I want to pause for a moment and say, well, let's say that you had a bunch of percussion instruments. You've got all these really cool ethnic instruments. You're working on a film score or a record, and you've got a couple of great microphones set up in the studio, and you've got all these different types of ethnic instruments, and you set up a 16-bar phrase, and you start laying elements, and you hear the previous passes, and now you're adding shakers, and now you're adding bell trees, and now you're adding congas and bongos, and you're doing all these really cool layers, and you're hearing the previous pass. And it's very cool. Now watch what happens when we finish. We're going to rewind back to the beginning, and we can just hit this button here called Export. Watch what happens. Boom, they drop right into DP. And they're all named here, Polar 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all mono tracks, and hit Save, and I'm off and running. I've got these tracks now in DP. So the other thing I wanted you to be aware of, what if you were doing a live performance? Let's say you were doing kind of a performance piece, again, with ethnic flutes or guitars or something, and you had your laptop in a live situation with an audio interface and a microphone, and you're just doing like overdubbing bass parts. It's like, it reminds me of the time that, Jocko did that really cool bass solo with Joni Mitchell on the Shadows and Light tour, where he was overdubbing himself. That's the same concept here with Polar, where you're able to do stacks and layers and not have to think. So let's just back up and let's just do this one more time from the beginning, just to make sure that everybody kind of understands how this works. So I'm just going to simply undo that pass, and we can just delete these tracks. Let's just do it that way. We're going to go back to Shift P, and now, check this out. Okay, one thing I wanted to let's just go ahead and hold Command, and I'm going to select all those passes in Polar, and I'm just going to hit the delete key on the computer. They're gone. Okay, so we've decided we're going to do some cool percussion layers today, or guitars. We're going to stack guitars and do this really cool thing where we're going to harmonize like 5 different guitars and create this amazing solo where it's all harmonized. So this would be a very cool way to do it. Remember, if we just did it in DP without using Polar, remember how we talked about how we could just record on one track and overdub, but we couldn't hear the previous pass. So I would have to go to the next track in DP with the arrow key. But what if I'm playing my instrument? What's the best way for me to actually make passes and hear those passes and not have to touch the keyboard and not have to touch Digital Performer? That's what this program is about here. That's what Polar is all about. So we're going to go, we've opened it up, Shift P. We have no tracks at all in DP. All we've done is set up a loop point. It doesn't really have to be a loop point, but obviously if it goes on too long, you're just going to have to wait how it kind of comes back around. So we just set it really short, 3 bars. Now the first thing we did was we picked the input, 414. Okay, and now we can trigger the passes manually, but I really love the idea of being able to trigger by the gate. Okay, so we've got it set to trigger by the gate. We talked about the threshold here. If I'm talking quietly, I'm below the threshold. I can obviously change this, and I'm always basically in, or I can set it really high, and it's set for a drummer where it's not, it's nice that you can set it really high, because as people are communicating, it's not just recording noise. It's not recording sort of unwanted takes, because the threshold's high enough. That's not getting in the way. But we're going to find a sweet spot for my voice here. So we're going to come down here, check once. I'm below the threshold, a little bit lower. Let's see, right? Chesting, 1, 2. I'm in. I'll go a little tiny bit lower. Okay. Okay, so that looks good. So again, now am I going to hear the previous passes? This time, yeah, I'll just try to not be so crazy sounding. Okay, so we're going to listen to the previous passes. And now I'm going to hit, and by the way, it's linked to DP's transport. So I'm going to hit record. And I'm quietly going to sip coffee. Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. One more. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So we've got 3 passes, or actually it looks like 4 passes of me doing this monotonous counting. But to get an idea of any kind of musical input source, I didn't have to stop. It was just a question of me. I could pause for half an hour as long as I was below the threshold. It wouldn't be recording. So now that we finished, I want to show you one other quick thing that you might actually use in this window. If I hold Command and I shift these various passes, now you'll notice I can collapse. Now what that will do is merge or sum those tracks together. So now, be careful. Obviously, you've now committed those tracks. But if you know, no, that's what I want. I want those to be combined. You could collapse those. So we can undo collapse, go back to the other takes. And so now, I can just hit export, and they'll drop right in DP. So now check out what happens when we're going to finally leave Polar. When I hit to close the window, it's going to ask me, do you want to save this session? And so I don't really want to save it, but I certainly could save it. And we're going to say, no, don't save, no problem. Because I've got what I need. I just went in to get my vocal tracks. And so now, that's a very cool feature I want you guys to be aware of. And again, frees up your hands, being able to let you set a threshold, do recordings of mono or stereo inputs, and you could do lots of them. And not only that, but it's not actually recording onto the hard drive because it's recording in RAM. And you could do, dozens of takes. And then at some point you could just delete them from Polar, or you could just say, you know what, export, and they'll drop right in the timeline. So I actually did I did an NAMM demo, was it last year, where I actually brought percussion instruments on stage, and I was laying down little bongos and shakers and things, and I was using Polar, and then I dropped them in DP, and then I quantized them on the fly. And that just shows you, and that's one of the reasons why I love DP so much for me. Because it's such a creative, to me, I really think it's the most musical DAW out there, because you really can think as a musician. And that's one great thing about DP. Okay, so that's another workflow that we talked about, being able to use that to record audio and then dump it in. We talked about using sort of a checkerboard style. We talked about looping audio. Should we pause for a minute for Polar, Jim? Let me open the participants here. And hey, Rich. Did you have a question?
Okay, yeah, real quick. If there were tracks in Performer when using Polar, you would hear those tracks.
That's right, you would. Mm-hmm.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Thank you.
Sure.
If you want to, like, you can mute them or unmute them as needed. Yeah. But you can bind it to the main transports or not. You can work in it as this completely separate window.
Exactly. It's a cool window. Thanks, Rich.
Matt, the other thing I wanted to just throw in quickly is that one of the really coolest things about Polar is that while you're doing the loop recording, you can change the length of the memory cycle. And so, like, for example, you could start with a 2-bar, bass part, and then go to change it to 4 bars, and then do a 4-bar phrase on top of the 2-bar phrase, and everything will just keep looping. And where it gets really interesting is if you change the memory cycle lengths between passes to divisions that are not even. So you could do 2 bars against 3 bars, or 8 beats against 9 beats, and they all loop. And so you can just get absolutely insane with asynchronous loops, and the creativity goes through the roof there. So it's really
amazing.
Fun.
That's amazing. Okay, cool. Thanks, Jim. Hey, Victor, do you have a question?
Yes, I was actually just wondering if you're working with Polar, but not actually linked to the transport, whether you can actually turn the click on and off from there. Is it the same? Can you use the same commands?
That's a good question. I don't. Let me double check and see if we can switch back to DP for a minute, and let me actually reshare screen for a second. And if we go back over to DP, and we go to Shift P. And let's mute these tracks for a minute. And if we unlink, then we can, see, we're unlinked. So check 1, 2. We're going to be in click land that way. Unless, you could print a click. You know what I'm saying? So check 1, 2. We're going to be in click. Does that make sense? So you could actually check 1, 2. Let's take those out of record.
Yeah, it does. It does make sense.
So in a way, it's so nice that have it, on the grid with DP, and you could, and like Jim was pointing out, setting up the loop points, or let's say there was a tempo map in DP, and you had it sort of speeding up a little bit, or there was a, varied tempo or meters. it's going to follow, Polar's going to follow the transport. So if you had some
Well,
accelerando,
you
it would
could
follow.
I think, like you said, you can actually print the click to that, and you could actually print conductor track next to it.
You could.
Click this
Yeah, I mean, it's
control
exactly
button.
right. There's a lot of different cool ways you could do it. But that brings up a good point. Thanks, Victor.
Mhm.
Ryan, did you have a question?
Yeah, hi, Matt. You mentioned you could save the Polar session you did on its own.
Right.
Could you then import it into another session?
can,
Is it
yes.
available?
Yep, you sure can.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Thanks for the question. You got it. Okay, well, I think we're in good shape right now. Let's continue on our way. So we're going to blow off these different tracks that we've imported. We're going to switch over to a different chunk here. This is actually a cover of Radiohead's Creep. And this is where a singer did 4 different tracks of vocals, and now we want to create a comp of those vocal tracks. So you see how this is a very simple little project. Let me make sure it's playing back and not too loud here. Let's do that. Let me highlight these tracks, Shift M. We're going to go into the mixer. Let's make sure it's So one thing I just did, I had automation on the master fader. And so one quick thing I wanted to do was whenever you highlight tracks in DP from the tracks window and you go to Shift M, it will scroll the mixing board to that selection if that preference is turned on. Preference, if you go into the consolidated window, we're going to scroll the mixing board to the selection. And so we talked about this. If I highlight these 2 tracks, Shift M, I'll see those tracks. If I select all these tracks, Shift M, and I just turned off automation play enable so that I could turn down the master fader. So it's not too loud. Okay, so we've got a vocal track, and you'll notice here we've got 4 different takes. So let's use the comp tool to create a composite. So we're going to go into the sequence window. Now, I'm a big fan of using the track selector. A lot of times you're in the window and you're looking at multiple tracks. And remember, option dragging one track will change the size of the other tracks that you're selecting. So option drag resizes whatever tracks are visible. We're going to go to the track selector. If the track selector is missing, by the way, Option Command E will bring up the track selector. That's the default command in DP. Any window you're in, if you're in the mixing board, you're in the sequence editor, you're in the MIDI editor, you want to be able to limit what tracks are in view. Option Command E as in Edgar. Okay, so now I'm going to highlight just the vocal Vox channel. Now, what we're going to do is, you see how it shows me my soundbite layer, my inputs, my outputs, my automation. At the very bottom, it shows me take 4. I'm going to click in the take column, and I'm going to go down here to show takes. Show takes. So now, okay, what do we have here? We have something now that DP's created called Comp 1. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, first of all, what have we done? We've gone into the sequence window, and we've gone to the take area, and we've gone to show takes, and now it's revealing in the sequence editor all the takes that pertain to that track, all in one shot. Now, one cool thing about this, like we talked about, I can actually rename these takes here. So for instance, let's say, as you were tracking, you were just in a hurry mode, and they were just generically named 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe you want to go in here now and option rename these tracks more specific names. So you can do that. That's one quick benefit of this show takes ability here in the sequence editor. Okay, and now the other thing I wanted to mention is, let's say you wanted to quickly edit the head of this file here, and so I could just simply drag over this, and I could just clean this up. We're not going to worry about the breath right now for that, and we're not going to worry about this fade. We're just going to do a quick, so that's another quick thing that you can do, is just, if you want to edit your takes, even if you're not going to even do a comp, you just want to edit the takes, you can still use this show takes to edit them. So that's cool. I could just live in this world for now and just do cleanup. Before I actually even make my comp, I might just take 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and just clean it all up, get it to where I want to organize it. And so, but that's okay. We're not going to really spend time on cleaning it up so much as what we're going to do is just use this feature. So how do we do this now? What are we going to do? At the very top of DP, you guys see where I have my tools. And we have one that has a kind of interesting look to it, where it shows you sort of various parts kind of overimposed on each other. Remember, with help balloons is turned on, help tags, you can always hover over and see what the names of tools are. And the comp tool, by the way, the shortcut for the comp tool is the letter B, as in Betty. So I can always invoke it by double tapping B, and there it is. It's got a unique sort of look to it, the comp tool, the icon for the actual pointer. So the very, very top track is going to be the composite. So now here's what we can do. The first thing we're going to do is let's just think of this creep cover as in sections. So let's do it like this. I'm going to click and drag for the first couple of sections. Now, when I click and drag, it's going to put in these pink borders. You know, think of these as sort of, we're defining a region to use the comp tool, okay? So now, you'll notice that this one is highlighted, this one is selected, so this is the one that is put on the top track. This is the one that's now in the comp. But if I simply go to the next take below and I click on this one gets put up above, this one gets put up above. So whatever once I define, you know, the comp sort of parameters, the in and out points, okay, all I have to do is simply click on each take and it automatically puts it up here in what's called the comp take. So let's just create a loop here. Let's actually start this around bar 8. That's fine. And we're going to stop the loop point at around bar 12. So let's just punch these numbers in here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to loop. Let's actually loop much shorter than that. Let's actually loop to bar 10. Save. And what we're going to do is as we listen, we're going to actually click on these various takes, and then it's going to automatically put it up above.
When you were here before,
I'll turn it down.
When you were here before, when you were here before, when you were here before, when you were here before.
So you guys, let's make sure I'm being clear about what's happening here. Once we went in and we showed this track in DP, and we went to the take column and we showed the takes, and now I've got all those 4 different takes are visible in the sequence editor. And so now we've used this comp tool. I've defined the start and end parameters, and when I simply click on, you'll notice, look at the waveform here. This one is now up above. This one's different. And you can just click. Now, let's say we only want to do the first line. There you are before, or here you are before. So now we're going to click in here, and we're going to say, no, actually, I want to actually do a different take in the second word. So now, watch what happens. We'll set this loop over here. And as I click, it's going to keep switching out. When I select it down below, it's going to put it up above in the comp. So let's listen to it.
When you were here before, I could look you in the eye.
Let's try this one.
When you were here before, I could look you in the eye. When you were here before, I could look you in.
So I'm just, as it just keeps rolling, I'm able to, since I've already defined the sections, I can just simply click and I'm auditioning that section for that take is now being put up above into the comp take. And I can just keep working my way left to right in larger swaths. I could do entire sections of songs, and I can just start clicking on those various, and you can get very specific. If we actually control drag the wiper. Now, one thing about when you're dragging this, it's going to snap to the grid. So in this case, my grid is turned off, okay? And so now you can get into specific words. So let's just see if we actually set up this loop here, and we're going to actually end the loop here at bar 9.3. So let's do that, 9.3. And so we're going to listen.
When you were here before, when you were here before, when you were here before.
So I just keep auditioning different takes now in the comp, and I can go all the way down to specific words. Now, one interesting thing that's happening is when it creates the composite, I have complete control over the composite. Like if I want to edge edit this, clean this up a little bit, let's say, well, I think we're getting close. I think this is where pretty much the first line, I'm liking this a lot. So I'm just going to edge edit this a little bit. Oops, take off the grid. Let's just clean this up. I'm going to do a little crossfade right here. Let's do a little tiny bit of fade in there. Now look, when I made that move, it didn't change the takes that they came from. Look, whatever takes these came from didn't get altered by it. And that's actually a pretty significant difference between the way that DP does comping and other major DAWs do comping. If I make a move to the comp, it's going to affect where it came from. That take is going to be affected by it. So that's something the developers did a good job in DP of doing, was keeping those separate. So now we can let's go to the next section. And let's go back and let's just go back to the comp take, and let's just hide the takes for a moment. We're going to hide them. And so we're going to live with this for a while. This feels like this is a good place to be for this first line. And now we can't work on it right now, so we're going to have to stop. Let's say hypothetically, we're going to come back the next day. Let's keep comping this song. Okay, we're going to do that. Come into the sequence editor, go to the take column. We're going to go back to showing the takes. Oh, and it's going to remind us. Oh, it looks like take 3 was the very first entrance. And take 4 was the last word of the first entrance. Okay, cool. Well, let's go to the next section. Okay, we're going to comp this. Okay, so what are we using right now? Well, look what's highlighted. Whatever's highlighted, whatever's shadowed and dark, that's the one that's being used up above. So now if I click, it's going to keep moving whatever's selected in the comp to the very top. So let's see here. Let's click and drag. We're going to do, we can actually break this up into individual words. Let's do from here to here. And let's even we'll do it like that. So let's hear take 1 by itself.
You're just like an angel.
Let's hear take 2.
You're just like an angel.
Take 3, click, click.
You're just like an angel.
Let's hear take 1, you're just like an angel. Let's hear take 1 into take 2, click.
You're just like an angel.
Oh, that's good. We like that. That's good. Well, I'll tidy up the comp a little bit here. I'll look at this sort of, I've got some extra sort of takes happening here. I'm going to clean that up. I'm just going to drag over that and delete that. We're going to clean that up. And we're going to keep working our way left to right. Are you guys following me here? What we've done is we've got multiple takes within one track. We're viewing them, and now we're using this comp tool, which is selected in the up above here in the tool area. And we're able to define the actual area, the start and stop, and be able to audition. When we just click on them, whatever we highlight, whatever's dark, gets moved up to the very top, and that's now our comp. You can get into specific words, and you can get very detailed with how you decide, what's going to be an area that you can choose the comps between. And again, when you're finished, you're working left to right. Now, let's say we zoom out, and we're looking at the whole piece, and it says, well, it looks like we ended up using a take 1 and went into take 2, and then we really stayed on take 3 for the whole rest of the piece. He just nailed take 3. That was a really, really good take. So that's perfect. Now I'm not going to necessarily have to do anything other than just say, now I'm going to go back to the take column and say we're going to hide the takes. Now here's an interesting thing that you could do. So the vocalists decide, hey, I can do a better job. Will you give me another shot here? Okay, well, let's do it. So I'm going to do a new take. And now I do 4 new takes. And so now I can comp those takes with the comp. And so you can kind of keep this cycle going. And you say at some point, well, can you just sing it right the first time? No. Well, that's the way it is in this world, right? So, but I'm teasing. So the idea is that, yes, we can use the comp, and we can comp other tracks with the comp. We can comp the comp, as they say. So that's the idea here. But at any point, there's no problem just switching back to showing the takes and then being able to resume your work and say, well, and by the way, when we're resizing the tracks, remember I talked about when you're looking at resizing the takes, option drag. So that way, here's the comp, here are all the takes. Well, let's just see here. Let me actually define with the comp tool. I'm going to turn that on. Let's define this area here. And let's define this area here. And let's just see, maybe he really did do a better job on take 2 on that last refrain. And then let's go to take 3 on that one. And so you always get a visual reference to what's being used because they're shaded. And then right up above, it's putting those up into the composite. And then let's say we feel like it's a good take. I'm going to highlight this, and now I want to do crossfades between those segments. So maybe I'm hearing a little glitching I might go in there and surgically fix all that stuff later, but just for the quick mix that they're going to use in the car on the way home, I'm going to go to Control F, and I'm going to do, well, this is great. We'll do an equal power crossfade 5 milliseconds before and after. We'll do 10 milliseconds. Tab, 10, apply. And so now I just put little tiny 10 millisecond crossfades in and out of every file in the comp so that, you know, if there's a little weird glitch or something, it's taken care of that. Cool. So I guess we can pause for a minute and answer a few questions before we go into another example of using the comp. So
Matt, one of the questions that popped up was, once you have a pink line, how do we get rid of it? I can't remember how you do that.
Well, you can just sort of drag over it. So for instance, let's say this one is unnecessary, right? Just extend over it.
I think there's a way to just, I don't know, click on it though, isn't there?
Yeah, you can click on it and select it. It looks like there it is. I usually just sort of repaint the lines, as it were. But it looks like you can click on it and delete it. Yeah, you can.
Oh yeah, so there you go. You can just select a pink line and hit delete to get rid of it. Cool.
Click on it to delete it, or redefine the area, whether it's longer or shorter, and you'll get the hang of it. You know, maybe you'll even do that in advance before the artist comes. You'll have all the takes, and you'll set the pink areas for defining what the areas are, and then you'll be able to start comping.
Right.
And then when I'm finished, obviously this is what we're all going to do, is we're going to go back and say, well, I'm going to hide the takes, and now we're going to get into pitch correction. We're going to really get our work, get into our, we know we've got the takes now. I've done in my save, I've backed up the project, and now it's time for me to do, what I'm getting paid for. We're going to clean this all up, and this is dead space that we don't need. I'm going to delete that, and we'll do a crossfade here, and you'll just, and then remember, at any point, you're always able to go back and still reveal those takes and still do more comping. So the big picture is, and let's just pause for a moment to remember that you're recording a singer or you're recording yourself on an instrument, and you've got a bunch of different takes. And so now this is a tool that we let you, as opposed to the way it used to be, was you kind of would manually go into a take, copy it, and then create another track and paste it, and just kind of painfully kind of have to create your own. And some people still have that way of working, which I get. Everyone has a certain way that they do things. But this is a way to be able to visually see all those different takes, and then be able to take sections and put it up above in the comp. We'll pause for just a moment for a couple quick questions before we go into another example. Okay, cool. Did you have a question, Ross?
Yeah, hey, Matt. Thanks so much again. I had a couple of questions. Going back to the, you were switching to takes the track selector. I've always had the issue. I have on dual screens, and I have edit on one and mix on the other. So if I go to the mix window, the track selector goes there, but when I go back to the edit window, it's not there. And is it always? Do you have to do that? Option Command D to get it back to link to the window. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you kind of have to get used to the. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. If I come and add, let's just Option add a couple MIDI tracks here or whatever. So we added a bunch of MIDI tracks here. You see them? And they're just generically named. So I'm going to highlight these tracks. Shift M is going to take me to those tracks. And let's say I open up the mixing board track selector and I add guitar and piano. Okay, now this is a state that I really want to be in. I don't want to lose this. I'm in mix mode now. But I'm going to go back to tracks because I need to work on some stuff. And so if I deselect all, when I go back to the mixing board, it's the previous state. If I select something in here and I go back, if I go to Shift M, it's going to update to what I've just chosen. So I'm a big fan of using Command D to deselect all, so that when I go back to the mixer, it's the previous state. But what was your question? Did I get that right, Ross?
It's not quite the same, just because I'm literally using two screens for separate mix and edit, so I can see them both at once. And so when I switch to the mix window on my second screen, the track selector might go there, but then when I go back to the edit window, I go where? Well, now I'm not seeing the tracks I want to see, or I'm not working with those. I have to literally select and deselect and select the track selector, and then it's back again. There didn't seem to be any way.
Well, remember that, the track selector needs to be in focus. You know how sometimes it's when you have multiple windows, each window has its own track selector. And so in order for, and you have to kind of keep that in mind. Like generally the rule is, and let's say you have, like you said, dual monitor, big sequence editor, big mixer, and you have your mixer set with the track selector, and you've got those chosen. And you click, make sure that the window is in the foreground the sequence editor is active, and then you'll have the track selector for that, and you can set that to whatever state you want. And they'll stay as they are as long as you make the window focus come forward.
Okay. Can I ask one other quick question?
Sure.
Just in takes, what happens if you you just shift? Because every now and then you get a singer who they don't sing perfectly. I'm a singer, so you don't sing perfectly in time, and you might have that one word. It's a great take, but it's a little early, and you just want to work on that one word and shift it. You're literally now shifting it away from where it was originally sung. How does that affect the take?
Well, remember, what's cool is remember whenever if we chose that word, and it's now in the comp, it's completely independent. And so
it doesn't change the original.
It doesn't change the original. In fact, maybe you would want to change it in the original because let's say down the road you wanted to come back to it and use it or not use it. And so I'm just saying, the great thing about the comp tool is that it's not tied to the take it came from, and that's a cool thing.
Right.
It's independent. Right. Thanks, Ross.
Thank you.
That's being finicky. Charles, do you have a question?
Yes, please. I'm trying to make a percussion instrument out of some recordings that I did in DP. The first question in that, is there a way to select and change gain in a number of sound bites as opposed to one at a time?
You know how one trick that you can do that, let's see, if you're in the, we can get rid of my MIDI tracks here. We'll say goodbye to that. And let's say we go into the sequence editor, and you see how, let's just highlight all these tracks, okay? I'm going to hold Option, and I'm going to switch back to the soundbite layer. And it'll do so for all visible tracks. So if I come out here, and let's say, we're just going to make some cuts here across this, okay? Now if I select all these, and I can use the byte gain, and I can say everybody here needs 5 dB added to it. So byte gain is a very cool way to just be able to select, whatever you want. Everything, anything, you can command select them. You can come in here and say, well, I could shift select these. All these guys I'm gonna go to byte gain, and I'm gonna make those guys all -10.
Wow, that's great. Where is that?
Oh, so byte gain is, now remember how we have the little byte gain fader, and that's for like sort of a la carte for each audio region. But if you go into the commands window and type in byte gain, or just type in byte. So I've assigned byte gain to the letter N because you can use single letters as key commands in DP. They're not going to interfere with text fields or name fields. So what's cool about this is, Charles, if you highlight this, you go to N, byte, and what's great is that, remember, that's an absolute value. So if you change it to -10 and you want it to be -12, you choose -12. You don't. If you choose -2, it's -2. It's an absolute value.
I get you.
Cool. All right. Thanks for the question.
Follow up on that. Can I create an instrument out of these sound bites in MachFive 3?
Yeah, you totally can.
How do I load those in?
Well, the best trick to do it with MachFive is to, and this is from my experience having done this with sampling, is to make your cuts in DP, get everything cleanly cut, edited, okay? Now, one thing you want to do is, if you've done crossfades and you've done byte gains and things, you're going to want to highlight those files individually and be able to merge them into themselves. Because if you're using pitch correction or if you're using byte gain, you're not actually written into the file until it's remerged. Or you can bounce it, but maybe it'd be faster in a way to highlight each of those segments separately, merge them. Then once they're, let's say these are the samples that I'm going to bring into MachFive. Let's say, let me undo this. These guys right here. Now I can just right click on them in the timeline in DP, and I can just export these selected bytes. And I'm just going to choose broadcast wave. That's fine. I don't need to save an export format. I'm just going to do them as broadcast wave stereo interleaved. And I put them on my desktop in a folder. Then usually what I like to do is I just launch the standalone version of MachFive 3. And then I can just drop them into the key map editor. And then it'll ask me, how do you want to add these? And you get the different options. Then I usually save it as a multi, and then I can bring it up in DP. Right now, there's been different versions of DP over the years that right now you can't drag and drop from DP into MachFive 3. You have to do it from the desktop. So that's why whenever I create my key maps in MachFive, I do it from the standalone version, but I export the DP from the audio from DP first.
Gotcha.
Cool.
I see that.
All right. Thanks, Charles. Helen, do you have a question?
Real quick, can the comp tool be used with different actual tracks instead of takes?
Yes. As long as those, you can use, like for instance, let's say you want to comp an entire drum kit, or you want to comp an entire background vocal section, and you have 5, 6, 7, 8 takes, tracks. I mean, generally, I'm showing you a workflow where those are takes within one track, right? But you can you can use the comp tool. In fact, that's a good segue, because I'm going to show you how to use the comp tool with multiple tracks. So thanks for the heads up.
Cool.
Yep.
Raul.
Oh, hey, how can I help you?
So you when you were showing the comp tool, you made the pink lines. You selected the different takes from the tracks, and then you added a crossfade. Once you've added the crossfade, can you then go back and change the take that you're crossfading into?
Yeah, you can.
So the crossfade will remain, and just the take will change.
Correct.
Oh, yep. Okay, thanks.
It's very flexible that way. Thanks for the question. Angela, do you have a question?
Yes. When you're working with these vocal tracks and viewing the waveforms, is there a way to add notes like horizontally below a track to type in the lyrics so you have a quick reference and you don't have to memorize what the waveforms look like?
That's interesting. I mean, we have a lyrics window and we have project notes, but having them sort of in line linearly. That's an interesting question. I mean, one thing, let me think about this for a second. I mean, let me go to the vocal track for a second, and let's say we show takes. Okay. And then let's say we split the window at the bottom, and we put quick scribe down below. I mean, you'd have to kind of create a situation where we don't have a MIDI track in here, but we could just use any dummy MIDI track as a means of having quick scribe. And now I know this is just sort of a workaround kind of way of doing it, but you can always put lyrics and text in QuickScribe, and it could be kind of, it depends on the zoom level. It's going to be tricky. And it's a good suggestion. Maybe we could create a track that's sort of almost like a utility track where you can put things like a marker, lanes, or lyrics, or I'm just trying to think of a quick workaround.
I think the closest thing to what you're asking for would be what Matt is showing now, which is using the lyric feature in the quick scribe window.
Okay.
And that would at least allow you to use the sort of main playback wiper to see what you would have to sort of recreate the melody notes and type in the lyrics for them in quick scribe, and then as you move the wiper, you'd be able to tell which word you're on by doing it that way. Yep.
Cool. Thanks for the heads up. Appreciate it.
Very cool.
Hi, Donald.
You bet. Yeah, I got a really quick one for you. Been a long-time DP user, and in the past, it seemed like when I was in the tracks window, and I did a selection and I wanted to enter the sequence window, that I would just select 2 tracks, and immediately the only 2 tracks that I would see in the sequence window would be those 2. Mm-hmm. At the moment, it seems that functionality exists for going into the mixer window. But if I enter the sequence window, I basically am seeing all my tracks, and then I have to go to the track selector, and it's a bit time consuming.
Yeah, let me see something here. Let me look at something here. View selection and sequence editor. Control Command E. Control Command E. Let's try something. Control Command E.
I've always just used Control S.
Control Command E.
I tried that one.
Well, now that's actually pretty good. Check that out. Try it. In the tracks window.
Control Command E?
Yeah, try Control Command E. So here's what this is doing for those who are following. Can you see my screen? I'm making sure I'm screen sharing. I think I am. Okay, I've got a guitar and piano in here, and I got a Control Command E. Control Command E, and boom, that's actually great. I got to work on that. I got to incorporate that myself. You learn something new every day. And that actually expanded the view to only those tracks. That should hopefully work. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
You got it. Hi, Robert.
Hi. I don't know if this is an obvious question or not, but once you've got your comp takes track finished, if you just want to sort of have that there, can you rename that? Can you save that as a separately in some way or other?
I mean, we did a comp here, right? And you see how it's called Comp 1, and I can option click and rename it. Exactly. You're not stuck with Comp 1. You can
duplicate it. You can also duplicate it and then rename that.
Exactly. Or you could take the entire track. Let's say you decided, well, I'm going to duplicate the entire track. Okay. And then for this track, I'm going to delete all except the comp. And I'm going to say, I'm going to asterisk that one. That's the one for sure. You see what I'm saying? So I've deleted all the tracks except for the one that I wanted to keep. So you can, like Jim said, you can duplicate the take, you can duplicate the track, you can erase takes, you can rename the comp. Very flexible.
I love this feature. This is the editing I do more than anything else in Digital Performer.
Oh, cool.
Just fantastic.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
You got it. Kenneth.
This is off topic, but I have all of my tools selected in the preferences, but at the top of DP, about half of them or more are grayed out. How do I get those back?
Okay. Well, also remember that, see how right now in my world, see how half of my tools are grayed out?
Oh, I see. Yes.
It's because I'm in a window where they're not actually active. Does that make sense? If I go into the sequence editor, watch what happens. See, these tools aren't really applicable to the tracks window. That's all. You'll get the hang of it once you go into the MIDI window. Some of these things are not available because they're audio tools. But yeah, check that out.
I see.
Cool.
Okay.
You got it.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay, so I'm going to close this project. I've got another project here. And just for a quick second, let's go back to this Music and the Meaning, which Gary Lynn Floyd is an artist that mixed this project for, and a very talented singer-songwriter. And this was an example I was putting together and thought, well, I want to at least take a minute and show, it's this situation where they've got a guitar player doing a solo section. And by the way, while it's loading here, let's talk for a minute about when a project becomes really large. This is something that, inevitably happens when we start recording a lot of different takes. The project's been around for a couple of years. We've been kind of adding to it, changing it and whatnot. And so at some point, it might be a good idea to do a save as version of it and make it a more kind of consolidated version of it. And so I'm of the opinion that it's a good idea to do a backup of everything. Always have multiple redundant backups of every project, of course, and just in case. But in the Soundbites window, you can always select the unused, and you can see in this project there's quite a few unused. So what constitutes unused? Well, certainly if it's a take, if anything that's in the timeline, even if it's a take, is going to be still considered active and relevant. Anytime you actually record something, you've hit the delete key so that it's no longer in the timeline, it's no longer in the takes, it's literally been deleted. It's still in the Soundbites window, and it's still taking up hard drive space on your computer. At some point, you might select those, and sort of the safest way to ensure that you don't mess up any projects that are also pointing to that audio is to go to the MIDI menu and say, I'm going to remove them from the list. So now they're still taking up hard drive space, just that now when I finally do my file save as, and I pick a new location, a new directory for it, and I duplicate the audio data, and I hit save, it's going to only take the relevant audio files. It's not going to take all the extra stuff. So this project was fairly large. And so you can see we've got a guitar solo here around bar 88. So you can see 10 different takes of the guitar solo. So let's just quickly together do the comp tool and make sure that everyone knows sort of how to use this. We go into the sequence editor, and if I had a bunch of tracks here selected, I could hold Option. Option will let me choose the lead guitar amp. Let's go out around bar 88, and here it is. And so let's see, we're on take 10 right now. Why don't we go ahead and show the takes? Okay, it's going to open them up. Okay, so you can see I want to see more of these. So we talked about resizing them, holding Option. I'm going to resize these. And we can make this a little bit smaller so we can see. I can see all 10 takes. Now, remember, we can also do editing with being able to see these. So if I want to sort of trim the beginning of this a little bit, I can select those, hit the delete key. And now we're going to use the comp tool. So let's just see if we can hear this. Let's make sure it's not too loud in the mixing board. We'll turn it down a little bit, turn off automation. I'm going to boost the lead guitar a little bit. We're going to select, oh, I see there's automation in that track. So I'm going to take off the automation. I think what they did, and I'll show you the automation layers, we did sort of a nice move where it kind of grew as it came in. We're going to turn it off. And so it looks like it was starts at around -8 and it gets up to around unity. So if I put my mixing board, take off automation and put this, double click to 0, we should be in the ballpark. So now I've showed the takes, and I'm not using the comp tool yet because see, it's not selected yet up above in the tool area. So I'm going to click on the comp. And so now let's maybe only do the first couple bars. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to create the pink borders up until it looks like there's sort of a break here in the solo. And so this one is shadowed. That's the one that's up above. Let me actually switch this to the soundbite view. So watch as I watch the waveform up above as I start clicking on different takes. They automatically get put up above. So let's just start hearing a couple of these. And so let's go up here and let's just start the playback here. Let's loop there. Perfect. We're going to actually loop this section, and we'll try a few. I like that one. That one starts really strong, but maybe it'd be interesting to hear like right around this area. Let's just try, let's try a different one. You're going to start with, looks like 4 is a really good starting one. Let's try 4 into 5. It's maybe not the world's greatest place to cut in the middle of that phrase, but let's try 4 into 6. And you can see what we're doing here is we're just going to loop the timeline, and we're just going to play and just keep clicking and making each of these different areas, different takes, the comp. And we can keep redefining, like Jim was saying, we wanted to delete this, or we could say, well, you know what, maybe we start here. Why don't we actually add another pink divider in the second half of the end? And then, we can just keep defining the areas and start auditioning. Let's try maybe, and by the way, 10 was the actual comp. 10 was the final take. Let's try 10 into 6. And this starts really good. So let's just stay on 10 all the way to the end, and we'll end on, we'll go 10 into 9. Okay, let's check it out. That's kind of cool in a way. I mean, he goes up an octave on that very last section. And so, you know what? I think we're going to stick with that for now. Okay, the guitar player's not here, but we can always change it later, no problem, right? So I'm going to save the project. Let's go back up to the comp, and we're going to hide the takes. And so there it is. There's where we left off. And we could rename that, but let's leave it as comp for now. We need to do a little bit of editing work here. When we do that, when it finally switches here, let's zoom all the way down. And it looks like, actually it's perfect. It's right at the zero crossing. I'm not even going to need to put any kind of crossfade there. That's going to be perfectly clean. DP is very forgiving when it comes to edits and cuts. It's a magical program when it comes to being able to do this kind of work. I mean, I do a lot of piano recordings where you have, harmonics, and DP is very, very good when it comes to making very precise edits. So this again, though, if we want to just quickly do a crossfade, we talked about how you can always, select. You can select across any region. Control F will bring up create, fades, and then we can do things like equal gain, equal power, independent. So they're completely independent, and we can sort of, and then we can manually do crossfades by pulling the fade handles. But it's really nice to be able to say, well, 50 milliseconds in and out, and that's just sort of like an insurance policy to make sure there isn't any glitches, although I think that those were going to be clean anyway. So we've got our comp. We're rocking. We're ready to go. We're going to make our mix. So we go back to tracks. We're going to select all. We're going to bounce to disk, Control J. And we're going to make we'll just make an MP3 here for the artist. So we're going to switch from file format over. I've got my own custom MP3s and my ML 320s, or you can save, whatever you're going to do. So 320 and left and right. And we're going to do a lesson on bounce to disk soon in the next coming week or so. We're going to talk about being able to do stems if you want to have multiple output bundles or tracks bounced at the same time. And there's our stereo mix. So we're going to we're not going to worry about the bounce right now. But there it is. So we just comped a guitar solo, and we did a crossfade, and now we're going to save and move on. So the last one I want to show you is the one that we talked about with Helen. We're doing multiple tracks and comping. So we're going to close this project. I'm not going to save the project. Command D will not save. Command D. Okay, so I've got one here that's an orchestral piece. What's it called here? Orc comp. And 1.1. It's interesting. Everyone kind of has their workflow. I don't personally use autosave because I think I mentioned before I'm a reflex saver. I save after every move. So what I like to do is when I do save as everybody, you come into the project, you're working on something, and I always remind people periodically do a save as, not duplicate the audio, but just give yourself sort of incremental versions. And it's interesting watching like composers, high-end composers in LA that how their whole team has a certain sort of way of a protocol, like a version 1 of an A signifies a certain change, and then another number signifies a new version, and then the letters signify, and then they have this very unique structure. We need to go to 3C. 3C is the version, that's the print version. So everybody has, and so what I like to do is I like to put, since I don't use autosave, I like to store my projects that are older in the autosaves folder. And that way I'll keep them there. They're tucked away so that I always see what the last project that I'm working on. I only keep the one out loose, that's the real one that I'm working on. I put the other ones in autosave. If I need to call them back up, I can just launch them there, or I can move it back into the folder. And so that's just a little thing that's a neurotic thing that I do. So this is an orchestral project that was recorded in Budapest, which it's amazing, how you can get unbelievably good recordings now in Moscow, Budapest. We did this project. This is a director, musician, composer named Chip Rosenblum, who's a very talented director, and he's got musical projects that he does as well. And so we did this in Budapest, and I mixed it, and I thought, this would be a good example of showing the comp tool with this. And so this is just a rough piano, and this is not even mixed. This is just very in a rough form. But the way it's set up here, we've got the Decca tree, the purple mics, and we've got some spot mics on the woodwinds and the strings, and we've got some brass. We've got a master fader, and it doesn't even have reverb in it. It's pretty raw. And the piano is a sample. But you'll notice that I've got 3 different takes. And this is a lot of tracks. This is like 30 some tracks. So if we're going to use the comp tool across the orchestra, how are we going to do this? Well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a group. So let's do that. I'm going to highlight all. I'm not going to worry about the piano. That's separate. I'm going to highlight all the way down. Shift Command G. Shift Command G. That's going to let me create a group. Now, what are the attributes of the group? Okay, well, yeah, switching takes, yep, for sure. Naming them, yep, that's good. Take comping. Take comping is selected. So this group is going to let me do take comping. Volume is good, yeah, sure. I don't really need much else. That's all I want to do is be able to comp. And maybe volume comes in handy too. So I can always change this, by the way. This isn't some permanent thing that I create. If I hit OK, now remember we highlighted tracks and we chose Shift Command G, Shift Option G. Shift Option G brings up the actual track groups window. And there's my group that I just created. And I might just Option click and rename this. I'll just call this Orc Comp. Now, cool thing about, and again, we're in a tangent zone here. Who is a part of this group? I'll open up the folder and I'll say, well, you know what? Later on, we don't want the Decca tree in the comp. So how do I do that? I can right-click on those tracks that are selected from the group and take those out of the group. So we always have the ability to modify not only what's in the group, but also if I close this folder and I go to Custom, and I open it back up and say, well, it turns out I really do want to have pan as one of the attributes of the group. So you can always add that after the fact. You can always change that group, and you can also suspend the group by just clicking on it, turning off the group. So we're going to turn it on so it's active. And now we're going to close the left sidebar. Okay, if I'm looking in DP over here, if I shift left bracket, will close that sidebar so that I've got maximum screen resolution here. Okay, cool. So we're going to go into the sequence editor, and let's bring back our track selector. And we don't need track groups. We certainly don't need it to be this wide. So we'll bring this over. And so now the tricky thing will be is I'm going to option resize these tracks so that I can make sure that I can see the take column. There it is. So I'm option dragging the first. I let go. All the tracks in here are going to now be this new visible. There's all 30 some tracks of the orchestra. So now let's try to use the comp tool with this. So we're going to start with, we're going to go switch over here to show takes. Good. So I think it was a question of see how it's taking a breath. That's a pretty demanding move because look what it just did. This is track 1. And it's got take 1, 2, 3. This is track 2. This is the left mic of the Decca tree, and it's got 3 takes. This is the center mic of the Decca tree. There's 3 takes. Now, if I start scrolling through this, look at this. This is a massive list of not every single track times 3 takes. You know, so whatever, 90-ish, 90-some tracks now. And this is a laptop, by the way, that I'm running this all on with a solid-state drive. So what are we going to do now? We're going to turn on the comp tool, okay? And let's click on, I happen to know that take 3 is a very good take. It was the final take. It was the circle take. So I'm going to start with take 3. Let's zoom out here. We can really get, it's not a long piece of music. And so everybody is on take 3. Look at the shadows as I scroll down here. All the shadows are the third take of every mic. See, they're all there. So that means they're going to play. So if I start playing this back, now let's define some pink zones here, right? Some areas that we're going to use. So let's do that. Let's start with let's go maybe up until the start of this verse here. Okay, so let's hear that. It sounds really good. I mean, long notes in the strings. Let's hear take 2. Click. Everybody in the orchestra switches to take 2. Play. Okay, and let's go up to take 1. Okay, so I think, take 3, like I said, is the circle take. So we're going to leave it on 3, but it'd be interesting when things get moving here and the orchestra starts picking up steam. Let's see how good what take 1 was. And we've already defined that. So let's just hear it going into take 1. Let's switch to 2. Well, God, it's interesting how take 2 has got a lot of life to it. It's almost like I think that they played it really loud and maybe there was notes from the conductor that say, hey, it's a little hot there. So if we use that take, we have to kind of consider where the mix levels are. And so maybe that's a little hot. But maybe we want that for that section. And maybe when it actually finally gets out to this, where it goes into the biggest section here, maybe we could try creating another area to do the comp. And so let's see what happens if we go from 2 to 1 here. Let's see what that's like. We'll just roll. So we lost some level, and of course we have a glitch. We've got a pop. So if we're going to actually do that, we're going to need to clean that up. And so let's go down here, and let's just do a quick down and dirty edit. Let's just see what happens. We've got this crossfade. Let me double tap W. And let's see if we can just get away with that. Okay. So there's no pop. We fixed the pop. It's just that it's not the world's greatest edit point. It's not. You're not going to do it in the middle of that phrase. But I want you guys to see the bigger picture, which is let's back up for a moment. Let's close the comp and go back to hide takes. And so it's going to take a breath because this is a pretty tall order across 90 takes. And again, on this laptop with 24-bit files from an orchestral session. So look, it really is thinking here. And we're going to let it switch back and hide the takes. I'm going to save. So now we go back to the tracks window. Everybody's gone home. We've got our comp. We think that's a good place to be. Now we can always switch around and say, well, we've got our comp, but let's just listen to 3 again by itself. And then we go, well, no, we're going to go back to the comp and we're going to go back to the sequence editor and we're going to continue our work on creating a composite. And so what we just did is, first thing we did when we opened this project is we created a group, Shift-Command-G, and we told the group that it needed to have these attributes like switching and renaming and comping. And then we made sure the group was active, which of course it is when you create it. And then we went into the sequence window and we just switched to the comp and we defined the actual pink areas where the in and out points. We started clicking and we created our comp. We did some crossfading. And so this is a really cool tool. So comping is not just about a solo mic or a vocal. It can be about a band, guitar comping, orchestra comping. This is really cool. And at some point, this is a big project. I've got all these different tracks. At some point, I might want to actually, do a save as and then delete everything but the comp. Because I don't want to, if I have to give this project back to the client, maybe they'll want everything, maybe they won't, maybe they want just the final edited take. So but you'll have all that as an engineer, and you've done this great work. And so, again, like DP, a tool that does film scoring and sound production and notation and clips and comping. So for, post-production work, mixing work, this is one of the great tools that you guys are learning and probably are already very, very good at. So let's take a break and go back to questions. Helen.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how did you get your takes to all change at once? I was trying to go through that, and I'm not succeeding at that.
Oh, okay. When you highlight all the tracks in the tracks window, and you hit Shift Command G, will create a group of those selected tracks. Shift Command G.
Okay.
Now, when that window pops up, you get to choose what the attributes of the group are. Make sure that you choose naming of the takes, switching of the takes, deleting of the takes. And then in that way, when you switch one, they're all grouped together. They'll all switch together.
Okay.
Cool. Benoit?
Thank you. Again, my question is about MIDI tracks. It seems that this comping is not possible with MIDI tracks.
Correct. Yeah, I mean,
that's too bad, really, because when playing with virtual instruments, we would like to do exactly the same kind of editing with MIDI tracks controlling virtual instruments.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, absolutely is. I mean, DP is one of the best sequencers on the market. I mean, it's been really one of the best for a long time for MIDI sequencing. It does all these things, and it should have the ability to do comping of MIDI tracks. And we talked about even changing the overdub behavior. So definitely logged and filed. Thank you.
Thanks.
John, did you have a question?
Yes. So I've been using Performer for a long time, and Digital Performer. And so I have many old sequences that before you had the comp ability, but you had takes. But, to use takes before you had comping meant that you had to, do it the old way of copying things and then pasting them on a comp track that you made yourself. So I have these old sequences, and the way that we used to do it is just record new recordings right over the old one on one take. Then you can cut them and move things out of the way, and you can expose stuff.
Right.
But is there a way now for me to take these tracks that have multiple layers of recordings and make takes out of them automatically?
Yeah, and I see flickers of the chat where our friend Glenn Workman, who's a longtime excellent DP user and instructor and producer in his own right, obviously, has been nice enough to help Jim and I. But let me switch over here because I want to talk about, we've actually covered this a little bit over the couple seminars, but obviously hard to say if you caught that one. But let's do this. I'm going to go to the chunks window, and we're just going to create an empty sequence. And I'm going to switch over to the empty sequence, okay? And we're going to delete, and we have nothing in here. And so if we have a bunch of audio tracks, let's say, remember how in DP you always have the ability to take audio tracks, and if you select all of them, you can hide them and absorb them as actual takes within one track, see? So now I've got one audio track with all the takes that were once their own audio tracks. And you can do the opposite. If you have a bunch of takes in one track and you want to start looking at them independently as tracks, you can always go back and say, no, actually, let's do the opposite. Let's turn all those takes into tracks. So, but when it comes to audio layers, that gets a little tricky, because I think here's the point that you're making. Let me show you something here. This is one audio track, and I'm going to rename this, Vox, and the input is going to come from my, quote unquote U87, which is a 414. But if I turn on overdub and we record check 1, check 2, check 1, 2, that's me talking, and I leave overdub on and I start recording my second pass, record check 1, check testing, check 1. So I've got layers, you see. And is this starting to make sense for what you do, John?
Yeah, this is exactly it.
So this is where, again, there isn't a way that DP is going to take these layers and let you comp layers. You see, so unfortunately, the work getting these as their own takes is up to you currently. Does that make sense? Here's a technique that you could do. I mean, certainly you could, duplicate the track. Right. And then the one thing I wanted to mention to you is, you see how this is the top layer?
Yep.
And we've gone over this before, but I want to make sure this is really clear. If I click on this, it's behind. Okay. But if I want to make it its own take so I can use the comp tool, what I might do is go now up to Edit, Layering, and I'm going to move to the front. Now all I see is that. So now I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to actually go to a new take, and I'm going to paste it. Okay, and we should have maybe defined the time range so that I could snap it right where it needed to be. But now I could rename this. I go back to take 1, and so now I could take this one and go back to Layer, and I could move this one to back, and there's my little one that came forward. So again, I hate for you to have to spend an enormous amount of time on this, but again, if it's layers in a track, you'll have to sort of differentiate those layers as takes so that you can use the comp tool. And unfortunately, yeah, it's just the way that it's designed.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks, though.
Thank you.
Yep. Jackie?
Yes. I was wondering, when you are recording, say, a vocal track, and you have a bunch of comps, and a bunch of takes, and you've comped them, and then the next day you come back and record another take, it creates like comp 2, and I always end up getting confused as to which one I'm supposed to use at that point, and I tend to try to avoid that, and I know I'm creating myself more work than I need to.
Remember how we talked about how you can rename comp 1? And so for instance, if you have a bunch of vocal tracks, as they're all as takes, and you've made a composite, and you hide the takes, and now you're left with the one composite at the end of the day, and you rename the composite comp 1 something like, day 1 edits, or you can name it whatever you want, maybe not a long name, but something that signifies that, hey, that's day 1 comp. Come back the next day, you add some new takes, and you're doing it. When you open it up, you'll see the new takes, and you'll see the day 1 comp. That's the only real, you just have to sort of manually manage what's visible. But I think maybe just seeing comp 1, comp 2, well, what's comp 1, maybe just name your comp something more definitive.
Okay, and do all the takes then at that point stay will they all take effect still if I start comping from that point?
Yeah, the cool thing is you'll have access to all the original takes, plus the day 1 comp, plus the new takes. Okay. Yeah, you're not just stuck with, even though you've got the day 1 comp, don't think of it as like, well, it's all rendered, that's all I can use. No, you've got access to all of them. Day 1 was like pretty good. Like it left you in a good place, but you can always go back farther than that into the individual ones.
Yeah, you can add more takes and then incorporate those into that same comp. Or if you want to preserve that comp, you could duplicate it and then, work on the duplicate so you're preserving the original one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You got it. Mark, did you have a question?
Is there any way, right now I'm stuck in Costa Rica with a small MacBook Pro rather than my 7-monitor kind of system. So I'm trying to condense screens. And if I'm looking in the sequence window and I want to see the take number listed first rather than the output number, because all my outputs are main out. I don't have bust out. I don't really need to see that, but it'd be good to see which take I'm looking at. Is there any way to reorder those in that view?
Not currently. It's a good suggestion. Okay. The only thing I would say, and unfortunately, when you go up and you make it skinny and you resize it this way, take is still, unfortunately, it's still on the right. You can't really move it to the first. The name, so yeah. I was just thinking in terms of screen real estate, sometimes we have to resize, if we resize it vertically or, horizontally, but take is still at the bottom. And it'd be interesting if we had a filter where you could say, hey, I only want to see the layer and the take. And I also
it would be nice. I'm normally a screen hog, so I don't really care, but now I'm working in something that my hands can cover.
Yeah, no, it's good feedback. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Charles, do you have a question?
Yeah. One thing I missed, you went through and I missed it so fast. How do you select unused sound bites from your soundbite list?
Sure, let's do that. So Shift B as in boy is the Soundbites window, or if you're using the consolidated window, any of the tabs you can switch over to Soundbites.
Yes.
And remember, anything that's in the consolidated window, if you double click along the title bar, it'll pop it out. So that's true of movie windows. And by the way, if you double click it when it's out, it'll pop it back in. So that's a quick way to get things in and out of the consolidated window for those of you who use the consolidated window, which I love and I think is very useful. So here we are with a ton of audio that's probably irrelevant. So I feel like I'm in a place now where I can maybe purge some of this stuff. So I'm going to go to the mini menu and select the unused sound bites.
There it is.
And there it is. And so then, like I talked about, be careful when you delete, because if there's another project file that's looking at that audio, it's going to come up with missing files. So what I often tell people to do is remove it from the list. And then when you do a save as with duplicate the audio, it will take only the relevant audio. Be very careful about this. You know, I also want to mention a quick thing while we're talking about this, because this comes up on occasion. Let's say, you know, you've been a DP user for quite a while now, and you had version 6 or 7, and there were times during this, your computer hasn't changed, let's say, over the past 7 or 8 years. Let's say you're using this great workhorse Mac Pro or whatever, and inevitably, you didn't realize that you have audio file folders, audio files that live on multiple drives. And you didn't realize that until one day there's a drive failure and you thought everything was on one drive, but it's not on the one drive. It's actually been on multiple drives. So what do I need to do in that situation? Well, it happens sometimes. Well, we have a default setting in DP with audio where all audio always gets included in the project. That's kind of been there for quite a while now. So it prevents this from happening. You record audio in DP, unless you've gone into the take setting and picked a different location for the audio file, it's going to get recorded with the audio with the location of the project. But what happens is, don't forget we have the view by, and in the top of the Soundbites window, I'm viewing all the folders. I'm viewing the names. I'm viewing everything by, you know, sample rate, sample format. Here's all my 24-bit files. But we can also view disk. So now look at this. Everything on this project is on my Macintosh HD. But sometimes you'll open up an old project and it'll be Macintosh HD. It'll be your GTAC, the C drive. You may have 2 or 3 drives being used. So now that's risky, because if a drive fails, then this project is dispersed over multiple drives. So that's when you would go up here and File, Save As, pick a new directory, and duplicate the audio, and DP will collect, and it'll make a self-contained version of the project. Even if it was on multiple drives, it's going to collect them all and put it in a new location. And so sometimes you have to do that. You'll just go up here and say, View by Disk. And again, it usually happens with older projects. And be careful about that. You know what? Let's just wrap, everybody. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Signing off. Thank you.